Hey guys, it's Roderick. I'm here with another review of The Real Housewives of New Jersey, Season 13, Episode 3, Boys Will Be Boys, okay? So, the Eileen Davidson Accord is off. We can start talking about these new chicks. So let's just get into the episodes. There's a lot of really interesting stuff that happens. So the episode starts off with the tail end of Danielle's mozzarella party, which, by the way, right to get to the chase, I'm liking Danielle. Like, she is kind of what originally, when you first came out with The Real Housewives of New Jersey, what they kind of envisioned. Even though she's from Staten Island, she gives me Jersey, she gives me realness. I'm really liking Danielle, right? So I like the idea that like mozzarella party. So we get the tail end of this argument with Teresa and Melissa, and I have to give Teresa her points, right? I really got the sense, based upon what we were shown, that Teresa really wants to dead this situation with Melissa and Joe. Now, also, Teresa is also not new to this television game, right? She recognizes that if you start having all of this argument with Joe and Melissa now, right, that she has to keep making good television. So I also recognize that Teresa has to keep making good television, and keep having the same argument so early on in the filming is really going to make it repetitive. So Teresa's pretty much like, look, okay, I'm sorry. Do you want to be in my wedding? Whatever. Melissa, declines, which I think is a very mature thing to do because, again, like, no one wants to feel like they're on the BC list of whatever like that. Melissa's like, I'm fine. And things kind of like end, we get a truce, right? So it's not necessarily detente, right? But really get a truce in the Battle of the Gorgas, okay? Which, of course, will be picked up later on in the episode. Then, we get Rachel and her daughter. Rachel and her kids are very, very cute. I really, I love the fact that she's like this dedicated mother, but also really fun. Again, very authentic. Her husband, Fuda, looks like he's going to fit in with the guys, like total Jersey too. So again, like Rachel, Danielle, so at this point, not problematic at all. So then we get this scene with Dolores and Frank. And I'm going to tell you, this whole Dolores, Frank, Polly thing is going to be a huge train wreck, and I'm totally here for it, right? Because the theme of this episode, one of the things that the editors are doing, right, and the crafting and telling a story through this docuseries with as many authentic moments as they can, is really drive home the concept of lack of communication, right? If you don't talk about the things that are bothering you in a relationship, whether it be friendship or whatever, they're only going to fester. And everybody in this cast refuses to talk about the important things that are really important to them, right? For fear that if whatever they say will not be received and it won't be agreed upon, right? The purpose of communicating how you're feeling isn't for the other person to validate your feelings, but it's for you to get it off your chest and then give them an opportunity to change their behavior, or you can change yours, right? But the fact is, no one really says how they're really feeling. Like, we get a lot of theatrics, we get a lot of angry moments, but no one ever goes to the person and tries to hold them fully accountable for their behavior, because the fear is, once you do that, then A, because you're on television, you won't have anything else to keep returning to be a dramatic conflict point. And B, then once you tell that person, then you and that person have to be held accountable for the conversation that you have. And nobody on this show wants to do this. Ergo, Pauly, Frankie, Dolores, okay? Last episode, as we saw, Pauly told Dolores, okay, I'm going to leave it up to you to manage these boundaries with you and Frank in this relationship. So when Frank shows up to the house to make up for the photo shoot for that he's being sick, Pauly tells Frank, you know what? I kind of felt some sort of way that you didn't reach out to me, to, kind of give me the lay of the land, lay out your expectations. But since you didn't, I'm going to tell you what mine are, and this is what they are, right? Now, Frank felt some kind of way about that because he's like, well, I didn't have his number. I was using Dolores. And Pauly's like, no, you should have got my number from Dolores and reached out to me directly. That's why you don't send a woman to do a man's job. Even though his sentiment was wrapped in a very sexist foil, what Pauly is saying is that if you want to be treated like the man in this situation, to have some respect, you should have stepped to me and showed that respect to me. that I can appreciate, regardless of whether or not it's right or wrong. I was like, okay, we see where that's coming from. So this situation is going to be a train wreck because Paulie's not really with the fake fuckery, right? I think he likes Frank. I think he could, but I really think he could take or leave Frank either way because his relationship with Dolores has no bearing on how he feels about Frank at all. And I think it's a very new dynamic for Frank because I think Frank really liked having Dr. Mike, someone who wasn't really around that much, and Dolores was really discontent, and she was kind of like outsourcing all the emotional support. She wasn't getting her relationship with Dr. Mike on Frank, but Paulie stepped in and was like, I'm all the man that she needs. I lift her up. I let her know, like the whole Whitney Houston song. And that's a different dynamic for Frank, right? Because I think Dolores has had other relationships where I think either the men felt intimidated by Frank or Frank was able to come in and kind of like wedge his way into like what his fixture was. And Paulie's not having any of that, right? So again, I think Paulie's approach has been, fairly healthy for the most part. It's going to be interesting how Frank and Dolores and Paulie kind of navigates this. Is Paulie going to continue to give Dolores the space to kind of manage this relationship and manage those boundaries, or is he going to get tired and try to manage them himself, right? And I think he's going to end up giving Dolores that time and space to manage it because they do have 2 kids. They do have a connected emotional relationship. I won't call it codependence, but I do kind of like deep emotional relationship. So it seems like he's going to give the work, but Paulie's not here to fake the funk with Frank. And he's not really, so I was like, okay, cute. Now we get to Rachel and her daughters. She's doing the photo shoot. And the whole thing with like her wanting to have more kids was like very interesting because she was, she has these 5 embryos. Being pregnant, was definitely hard for her. So she wants to kind of keep doing it. And the husband's like, slow down. So again, I think she feel like she's bringing authentic moments. It's not contrived. And Rachel's like, 5 stars from here on out. Now we get the Marge, Jackie, Melissa lunch, which I thought was really interesting because now it seems like Jackie has been downgraded to friend of a show, right? The friend of the show, which I don't know whether that was her doing based upon like whatever she has been dealing with her life, or whether the producers are like, you're not bringing it enough, or it could be that the show places a lot of stress on her with, the whole body dysmorphia, anorexic thing. And it may have been a kinder way of saying, okay, we still want you around. We like you, but we want you to get better, healthier, so that maybe we can bring you on. I'm gonna go with the latter. It could be any of the other former, right? Anyway, I don't think Jackie's too happy about her little demotion or whatever, because she starts coming for Danielle. And they're talking about how she was looking Danielle up and down. And yes, one of my biggest points with Jackie is that she is very judgmental and she doesn't know how to keep her judgments to the vest, right? It's one thing for you to have your own personal opinion. It's another thing to have your personal opinion and tell your good girlfriends. But Jackie is just very overt with her judgments with people, and that was one of the reasons what led her astray with her and Teresa's situation, because it was one thing for you to feel like, okay, I'm taking up for my friend. It's another thing for you to insert your judgments about a relationship that you don't really know about, right? So Jackie's just getting what Jackie's getting, you know what I'm saying? So I was like, whatever. I would take Evan 5 times over than Jackie anyway. So when we saw Evan in this episode, I was like, yay, Evan, Jackie, okay, but whatever, okay? Now we get to a very interesting scene, right? So it's Teresa's at home, Louie's there, they're talking about the weddings coming up, and then she's recounting the whole situation about what happened at the mozzarella party to Louie. G is there because she's eating her salad because she's about to go to the shore. And we get to, I'm not a big fan. I was just raised that children just don't get in grown folks' business, right? So I'm just not a big fan of the way in which Teresa allows her children to be privy to or participate in discussions where she's denigrating her brother. I'm just, even in places where Joe is wrong, I just don't like that look, because the fact is that is their only uncle, right? And you should be doing everything on your part to make sure that relationship is okay, even if your relationship is not good, right? So regardless of that, I just don't like that just leaves a little bad taste in my mouth. So Anyway, I guess there's a podcast. Like, I don't follow the show outside. I don't mean reading, listening to podcasts and going to blogs, whatever. So I guess Melissa put out a podcast that said that, and kind of congratulating herself and Joe for how they stood up for Teresa while she was in jail, and how she went and helped out with the kids and all this type of stuff, which was the narrative that was put out there during the time Teresa was in jail, because that was the belief I've had. Well, Gia and Gabriella say the only times they saw her, right, saw Melissa and Joe, was when that one time when they were filming, when they were at the house, and that they were not there, right? Because you recall, Teresa cut off Kathy and Rosie or whatever from the jump, right? So that's a very different narrative that was put out there, because it really was put out there like Melissa and Joe were there, filling in the gaps for Teresa, taking care of the kids, helping their parents take care of the kids. And that seems to not be the case. And I can tell that was a very authentic moment, because Gabriella, who does not like to get into bullshit, right, was obviously flushed and upset when this information was put out there. We don't know how this scene was edited to make it look like that, but her reaction was the same. So that leads me to believe that there's something not clean in this milk here, right? And what's leading me to the theory, right, that, and which we kind of get to the end of the episode, is that there is an investment in making Teresa look like a monster because she's done monstrous things in the past, right? So it's kind of like if someone does you wrong 5 years ago, right? And now they stop doing you wrong, but you never got over the initial wrong. You're going to keep harping on them about how they previously did you wrong. And every time they do something slightly wrong, you're going to keep getting on them about that, right? So the fact is that no one's hands are clean in the Battle of the Gorgas. But the fact is Teresa is playing 3D chess with these people. She recognizes that now that they're going to be upset about it, she doesn't have to do anything to them, because they're going to keep this going, and all she can do is plan her wedding, and they're going to end up looking like a bunch of monsters, right? As opposed to going and squashing this whole thing and being like, look, I don't want any more drama. I don't want any more acrimony. Let's leave the past in the past. But the problem is that because the past wasn't dealt with properly, it keeps getting popped up here, right? I am 1000% against Louis inserting himself in Teresa and her brother's situation. I recognize that you want your wife to be happy, and her being upset is whatever. But Louis is just doing way too much, because what has been shown is anyone who gets sucked into the Battle of the Gorgas ends up being a casualty, right? Because Teresa and Joe know how to fight each other. They've been doing it for decades and decades and decades and decades, and there will be collateral damage. We're seeing that with Louis, we're seeing that with Melissa, and we're seeing that with kids, right? With their kids. So the fact is that at the end of the day, Teresa and Joe have to come to a point at which they can squash it and be mature about it. So we'll get that later. Now we get the whole Jennifer Aiden and her husband thing. And, I enjoy Jennifer's scenes because I just cackle so much at this woman, because she's just the right mixture of like delusional and clueless, right? So she decides that the kids need to learn how to clean up, right? Because the son wants to have his kids over, his friends over, and they're like, are you going to clean? And she's like, well, we need to start having you do chores. I was like, okay, fine. Then she says, well, we're going to pay you. Okay. Then she's talking about she's going to pay them minimum wage or $1 over minimum wage. And did you see Bill's face? And they're talking about $14, $15. And he's like, okay, bitch, I got a whole ass cleaning crew coming in and cleaning this house because you ain't doing all this cleaning, right? Now you want to pay these monsters to go ahead and clean this house too at minimum wage too? And I was just like, okay. I just thought that was hilarious because Jennifer's totally clueless about this, because not like she's doing a whole bunch of cleaning herself. She may do a little bit of wiping and some 409 by the stove, but she ain't in there like, rag on mop like the Carol Burnett show in the beginning with her pail and water or whatever like that, right? So then we sit down, and Jennifer was like, I had this conversation with Marge, and Marge says I'm not really self-reflective. And Bill, like the good husband, was like, okay, here we go. You can see him doing the calculus in his head. How much do I have to agree with her so she doesn't flip the fuck out on me and ruin my whole motherfucking long ass day, right? Literally, that's the calculus equation. So he kind of takes the long way around it, and she starts getting upset because she wants him to say, yes, you're super reflective. The evidence is Jennifer is not self-reflective. I said this in the last episode. Jennifer is still upset about the affair. I don't know that she's upset about the affair or the fact that it was public, right? Because those are two different things. She can be upset about both, but it's questionable which one that she's more upset about now, right? Because now she's upset, then she's taking it out on everyone and whatever. And he's like, well, you're kind of self-reflective, but Jennifer's not self-reflective. If she was self-reflective, she would have figured out that the reason she was upset with Marge for Marge cheating on her husband with her current husband is because she's been cheated upon. Jennifer's not self-reflective. She's just very reactionary, right? And the fact is that her ego is dinged because she wants to think of herself as being self-reflective instead of figuring out, am I really self-reflective? What does it mean to be self-reflective? What is there evidence to be I'm self-reflective? Instead of being like, I'm self-reflective because this happened, and these were my reactions, Jennifer doesn't do any of that. She just wants someone in the choir with their robes being like, you so right, you so right, you so right, you so right. And that's just, and Bill's just like, I'm too tired because I'm working my ass to the bones to pay for this house, your shit, and now these motherfucking kids who want to do chores at $15 an hour like this is motherfucking McDonald's, right? So I was like, so Bill took the best way of it, right? So then we get Melissa and Danielle Melissa's pulling clothes for Envy or whatever. And this is where I start talking about the editors or the producers to really crafting a story. Because what they're really trying to do in this episode is create this potential foreshadowing of what Joe and Teresa's relationship could be like if they don't patch it by telling the story of Danielle and her brother, right? So Danielle has this brother. She was doing an Instagram post. The brother is making fun of her. She blocks the brother. Brother gets mad. Brother decides, brother's getting married. Danielle is a little bit too aggressively friendly with her future sister-in-law, sends a text to the brother cuts them all off, right? And so we see in the later scene when her daughter's doing the art show and how the dad's really upset about them not speaking, it's very palpable. I have a sibling, right? So, and my mother every time she's like, make sure you call your brother, make sure you check on your brother. Most parents want their children, especially as they get older, to know that they're going to have a relationship even after their passing. So the fact is that they're trying to show this is what Teresa and Joe's relationship could be like if they don't fix it, right? And so Melissa was not very receptive to what Danielle was saying because Danielle kind of couched it in, I believe it's the brother's new wife's fault. And that strikes a chord with Melissa because Melissa feels that she has been unduly blamed for the deterioration of Joe and Teresa's relationship, when the fact of the matter is, regardless of what Melissa has done and has not done, Teresa is Joe's sister. Joe is Teresa's brother. That relationship cannot deteriorate or cannot improve unless those two people decide to make it better. Melissa can say what she wants. Louis can say what he wants. Joe Giudice can say what he wants, said what he wanted. But that relationship falls or rises on those two people. The other people can contribute to the deterioration or the uplifting that relationship and the sturdiness of that relationship, but those two people have to do it. And so Melissa was a little tender when Danielle was telling them this, because Melissa says, well, I've always said I want them to do the better. I always have said this to do better, which I do believe that's what Melissa wants. The problem is Melissa's follow through, because Melissa is not evenly matched with Teresa, right? So you can want the relationship with your husband and her sister to be better, but then you get on a television show where the main storyline is a disagreement between the two, and it kind of exacerbates everything, right? So I'm not saying Melissa does not want her brother and Teresa to have a relationship. It's just that the show makes it murky, and at some point the Gorgers are going to have to decide to stop hawking their familial relationship for a television show, right? If they really want their relationship to get better, I want to speak to the ending and tell you somebody's going to get off the show, right? Because all the show does, the podcast and the blogs and the appearances, all this does is make things worse, right? Because in the absence of somebody else truly revealing something in their life that does not have to deal with their disagreement with Teresa, it just exacerbates it. And the fact is, if I was Joe Gorga, I would have gotten off the show, right? I would have taken my wife, would have gone off the show, fixed my relationship with my sister, let this be my sister's realm like it was, and just be a happy camper if my relationship with my sister was that important. But I can see the other side of that argument that says, why should I leave the show when she could just do X, Y, Z too? So it's a very nuanced situation, but I personally will always tend to sacrifice, offer sacrifice or compromise for the betterment of a relationship. Not everybody is built that way, right? But that's just me. Anyway, we get to Melissa, and so Melissa's mother and her sisters come over to her and Joe's shore house, right? And so they're sitting outside, and we see Melissa cooking, but she's putting old vinegar on a salad, which answers my question from last week. Why don't these chicks cook? Because none of them can really cook, right? So I guess that's why they didn't order any food in. But we get a very interesting dynamic. First thing I have to give Melissa and Joe points on is when they started to talk about Teresa, they sent the kids away. I thought that was a very mature, healthy thing to do. You do not want your children listening to you badmouth your family, like your only aunt, right? So we start talking. So Joe asked, Melissa's mother and sisters, were they invited to the wedding? And they were like, no. And I'm like, why would they be invited to the wedding, right? And, they edited show clips of like Melissa's mom with Teresa and Joe's dad. And I get that, right? But the fact is, Teresa can barely stand Melissa, right? She can barely, the truth is, Teresa doesn't like Melissa, right? She tolerates Melissa, right? So the fact is that if she can barely stand Melissa, why would she be inviting Melissa's family to the wedding? I thought that was a very wholly unrealistic expectation, even if it is the right thing to do, right? Based on what Teresa said. So they're going on, and then Joe's talking about hurt, and I'm about to be, and as much as I love Joe Gorga, right? Do have a weakness for Joe Gorga. Love me a good meathead. Love me my gorillas. I'm tired of Joe talking about him being hurt and Joe not doing anything by him being hurt, right? Because at the end of the day, you can fix your situation better than anybody else, better than talking about to anybody else, because you can just have a whole ass conversation with